Good morning, y'all. It's still same day, same beautiful day in the neighborhood here. Wanted to touch base with you on the three main theoretical structures that you've learned about in class so far, of structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. I think a lot of times these are taught as almost competing theories, but I think that it's much more useful to kind of understanding the social structure if we look about them and look at them and conceptualize them as really splitting up the pie of what we want to explain, and each one kind of takes their role in that, right? So for structural functionalism, it's much more about determining the what. What is the social structure that we're a part of right now? I'm going to use the current state with Black Lives Matter to kind of illuminate this or illustrate it. So from a functionalist perspective, you would look at it and say, okay, what are crime statistics? What are the statistics regarding incarceration? What are the statistics regarding police misconduct, right? And a conflict theory might come in and look at it and say, well, how did we get to that point? Why are we where we are today? And they would look at a lot of laws, the way things are structured, and the way macro level interactions and institutions act. Cleveland Plain Dealer did a report. It was about 7 or 8 years ago now, but it's, I think, gotten a bit worse since then, where they found that minorities are 5 times more likely to be arrested for drug offenses. And then once you take all the people that have been arrested, minorities are 5 times more likely to get jail terms as opposed to rehab or diversion programs and that. I taught for 4 years in the Ohio Prison Education Program, so I've taught at Pickaway County Correctional, and I've taught at ORW, Ohio Reformatory for Women. And I saw this, firsthand every day, where you would have people getting 5, 6, 7 years for possession. Didn't see that as much with white inmates there. Most of the time, it was for what we consider more legitimate crimes, things that involve violence, distribution, stuff like that. So you see the structural functionalist will look at it and say we have the what, and a conflict theorist would look at it and say the why. And you can't understand the problem, you can't even identify that there is a problem, let alone understand it, unless you have both pieces of it, right? And then a symbolic interactionist would come in and say, okay, that's the macro level. What is it at the micro level? What is it at the interactional level? One potential reason for the disparity is in the way that physical space is structured, right? If you look at the racial split between urban and suburban communities, you also see a split in the number of the availability of open space, or what we would call defensible space, right? If you drive down to the east side of the hilltop, you'll see the housing is older, it's closer together, the yards are smaller. Oftentimes you have more apartments, smaller spaces for each individual. It's a lot harder to conceal behavior. And I'm sure, even though I'm sure that you guys are all great high school students that have never engaged in any type of questionable behavior, I'm sure you know people who have. And in a place like Dublin or a Hilliard or a Worthington, you're much more likely to have defensible space, right? Bigger backyards, maybe your own room, things of that nature. So that right there makes it more likely that some folks, particularly those who are low-income minority or minority, would have to face law enforcement, right? I've seen, where I live in Dublin here, I've seen over the quarantine period, had several times where there's kids here in the park drinking cheap beer and doing other things. But the way the park is structured, it's big, it's open, they have sight lines everywhere, and it's much easier for them to conceal their behavior if somebody does start walking, right? As opposed to the smaller, more compact parks that you're going to see in urban areas, right? So there you can see at the macro level with structural functionalism and conflict theory how they would identify the what, they would look at the how and why, and at the symbolic interaction level, they try to add an intimate piece to the why. How are our lives structured and our interactions structured that make things more or less likely that certain groups will experience certain outcomes, right? So as you go forward, I want you to kind of think about it in that structure when you're talking about, we're going to be learning about groups, social norms, all these kind of things. Think about the what, this is what it is. And then think about the how and the why. It's important when we think about the how and the why to think about what do we have clear and compelling evidence for, right? Versus what is conjecture or what is not proven anywhere. And at the micro level, look at some of those individual interactions and how that might structure or impact things. I wanted to give you one more example, and I would talk about this quite frequently when I taught in Ohio prisons. Voting laws. We're right in the middle of a census right now, so they're going to redraw voting districts across the state and across the country. And with that gives us an opportunity to talk about one way that our laws have been structured to disenfranchise urban, low-income, and minority communities and give more power to rural communities. And that's in voter apportionment. As you might know, most prisons are built in rural communities. ORW is in Marysville. Sorry, it's a very small community. In America, over 75% of our population, however, lives in urban areas, right? And then we're dispersed throughout these large swaths of rural country with low population density. So what they do is, just by statistics, 75% of the people in prison are going to come from urban counties. Franklin County, Cuyahoga County, Hamilton County, those areas. Much more so than your rural areas, just because that's where the people live. So even if there was no racial disparities, no income disparities, none of that kind of stuff, you would still expect about 75% of the people or more in prison to be there from urban communities. They build those prisons purposely in rural communities. So when people come from their urban communities and they go to prison, they get reduced from the voter rolls for apportionment in the district that they're from, where they live, and they get counted as part of the population of the rural county that they're now residing in as part of the prison. Unfortunately, they're also not able to vote. So you have a system to where you're having, in Ohio, hundreds of thousands of people being transferred, and that political power is being transferred from our cities into our rural communities. So every vote in Marysville, every vote in Noble County, every vote in Pickaway County, every vote down in Lucas County, where Lucas facility is, all these prisons throughout the states, all of those counties, all of those communities have more, their vote is worth more because of those inmates. And that is quite concerning, right? Because that's a population transfer. You're artificially increasing the population of one area and artificially decreasing it as part of another. So somebody goes to prison, they leave their spouse and their 2 kids back home. They're not able to get that voting power. And 95% of the people in prison are going to get out. So when they get out, the policies and the world that they're facing are going to favor folks that, one, aren't as impacted by it, because not as many people from rural communities go to prison because of the population proportions there and density, and are going to be more likely to have policies and laws that aren't conducive to them getting out and being able to reestablish themselves as contributing members of society, right? So there we go. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, and be more to come. Hopefully the semester is going good for you guys and you're enjoying it. This is really weird. Hopefully it ends sooner rather than later. Have a nice day. It never turns off when I hit the damn button. Sorry.